Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Deirdre Donahue, the Assistant Director of the Miriam and Ira D. Wallach Division of Art, Prints, and Photographs, and I have the distinct honor of welcoming you tonight, everyone here in the room and joining online, and thank you so much for being with us. Tonight's conversation on ethics in public art features artists Laurie Anderson, Firelei Báez, and Walter Hood in conversation with the Mellon Foundation's Justin Garrett Moore. You have all of their incredible bios in your printed programs, and those of you watching online can see them on the event listing. We're proud and grateful to present this evening with the American Academy in Rome. Artists in public libraries are exceedingly effective agents of social justice. They embrace the idealistic premise that bold storytelling to everyone can have a profoundly transformative effect on society if it is freely accessible. The Wallach Division is a part of the vital network of public libraries in New York that reach patrons through our brilliant staff, facilitating research, classes, tours, publications, and exhibitions. What we offer is a plethora of images, artifacts, and knowledge, about 100,000 times more diverse and interesting than anything you'd find in a browser search. Please come and explore the library's extraordinary holdings. Drop us a note at art@nypl.org to ask us to help guide you to find what you are looking for, and we'll have it waiting at a seat for you. All you need is a New York Public Library card, which it goes without saying everybody in this room has, right? At the end of our conversation, our speakers will be glad to take a few of your questions. If you're here with us in the room, you will see note cards and pencils left for you on your seats. Please write your questions at any time, and some of our incredible library staff will be coming by periodically to pick them up. If you're watching online, you can send your question in the chat or by emailing publicprograms@nypl.org. Wherever you are, we'd love to hear from you. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Isfahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course, by all of you. Thank you for your support and for being here tonight. Now please welcome Mark Robbins, the President and CEO of the American Academy in Rome, to tell you a little bit more about tonight's event.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. It's great to see you. Deirdre and I go back to ICP days. It's about 12 years ago, so it's great to see you here at the library. And it's wonderful to be here. This is the inaugural evening of a wonderful new partnership between the American Academy in Rome and the New York Public Library. So welcome, and thank you for coming out on such an inclement night. I want to thank Tony Marks, the president and CEO of the Public Library, Faye Rosenfeld, as well as Aidan Flax Clark, both in public programs at the Public Library, and the rest of the Live from NYPL team for their wonderful work on this collaboration. I'd like to also thank Andrew Mitchell at the American Academy and Jake Rivers and Sean for their work helping to put this together from the Academy side. This partnership actually grew out of discussions with Sebastian Harrell, who is our Drew Hines librarian in Rome. And he took the early steps to forge this partnership with the library. And in addition to public programs like this, this partnership brings the entire catalog, I was going to say card catalog, but catalog of the holdings of the public library to the fingertips of everyone who's doing research at the library at the American Academy in Rome. So this increases our abilities as a research institution given the vast holdings at the public library. So this is perhaps one of the most powerful partnerships possible for us. As many of you know, the American Academy in Rome is a center for independent study in the arts and humanities. And each year, from over 1,000 applications across 11 disciplinary areas, from ancient studies to musical composition to literature and architecture, we select 35 Rome Prize winners. And they're joined by Italian fellows and invited residents to form a vibrant community which is interdisciplinary and numbers nearly 100 people. This community has yielded composers like David Lang and Ashley Fury, the classicist Mary Beard, writer Andre Aciman, artists Charles Ray, William Kentridge, Sanford Biggers, and Carrie Mae Weems, the modern Italian scholar David Kurtzer, photo historian Deb Willis, Jason Moran, performer, as well as members of our panel tonight. Laurie Anderson was a resident at the Academy, and Firelei Báez and Walter Hood in landscape architecture were also fellows. Walter was my year, so I have a special affection for Walter. And the Academy really exists to support artists and scholars with work that has an impact for generations. As an increasingly diverse and global institution, it benefits individuals and their projects, certainly, but it has broader cultural impact for generations in orchestra halls, universities, and across public spaces. The presence of this work changes our understanding of time and our place within it. And this is what seems to be one of the most powerful things about the New York Public Library. It is really, as someone who grew up here, this is really foundational. And it's not just this main building. I think many of you read in the New York Times a review of 3 of the branch libraries. Those are hugely important in communities across New York. And as you could see just in your 7th floor elevator ride, everybody comes to the library. It is one of the most public, egalitarian institutions, and it offers information across a huge bandwidth without judgment, without a kind of superimposition of values that may inhere within a specific group. And that's really the power of scholarship and the arts, is really to delve into the more critical edges of who we are as a culture and who we are as individuals, rather than to smooth out difference. Really, in our country, we're about difference, and celebrating that difference is what institutions like the Public Library do, and it's what we work to do at the Academy each day as we put together our group of scholars and artists. Tonight's event on ethics and the arts builds on a theme which has been developing at the Academy for some time. You know, last year was the 100th anniversary of the March on Rome and Mussolini's rise to power and the power of the totalitarian state. And the way the conference was organized, and this was done by Marla Stone, who's one of our program directors, and Marla had purposely started with contemporary issues and worked back the 100 years. So looked at white supremacism, looked at the facts about incarceration in the United States, and then worked her way back to think about what can occur when history is received and accepted uncritically, and people believe in signs and symbols rather than having a literacy about where they actually stand given culture. So we did a series of conferences, first on ethics and then on patronage, thinking about who supports artists, who supports architects, who supports literature, and what is that work in the service of. And tonight we have a wonderful group of speakers. Landscape architect, again, Walter Hood, artist Firelei Báez, who's recently at the Venice Biennale, and Laurie Anderson, who was at the Academy in 2006, really a transformative artist who has done such phenomenal work. And I know she's been honored at the New York Public Library, as she has at the American Academy in Rome, for that really amazing work. She is an exceptional individual. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by architect and planner Justin Garrett Moore, who has taught at a number of institutions, and including Columbia and Syracuse, and he is currently, as you've heard, at the Mellon Foundation, where he's working on a series of programs that direct support towards programs that'll have an impact on community life and our cultural present. So we thank each of them for being here. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers to the dais.
All right, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you to the Public Library for hosting. So you'll see there are some images that are going to be circulating with the incredible work of these artists and designers as kind of background, but we may occasionally pull up some images directly. So as Mark just introduced, we have an incredibly large topic, ethics and public art. It's in a way, it's too big of a topic in a way for these kinds of conversations, but it is an important prompt and an important challenge for our work. So I wanted to first kind of kick off the conversation and think about a conversation we just had backstage, actually, about what do we mean by ethics, right or wrong in public space? What does it mean to try to navigate that? I'd like for each of you to speak a little bit about the need for difference in public space, the need for multiplicity in our lives and in the public realm, and just a little bit about, from your experiences or work, how each of you have responded to that challenge of through your art, through your practice, finding ways to allow for difference, to allow for multiplicity in our public spaces. So I will volley and voluntold Walter to start.
I thought if I looked down, you wouldn't call on me. If I look away, everybody's hiding in full sight. Thank you, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. This is a very difficult question, as you said, but I think I can only amplify it sort of through my own experience. As trained as a landscape architect, an architect, urbanist, and an artist, starting out in these disciplines, you're part of that culture. You're part of that culture. Mm-hmm. And for me, for a long time, I wore my blackness almost in an invisible way, because I thought that I needed to sort of literally veil it off and actually become a Le Corbusier or whoever, that I was being taught. And it took literally about 20 years of practice before I got comfortable with seeing myself in my work. And it's a very hard thing when you think about it, because you have a client, particularly with client-based work. And when I say comfortable with myself, I got to a point where I think Toni Morrison, in her latest piece, she talked about the little man on her shoulder, which I thought was wonderful, and how through her first review, she refused, right, to accept the review of one of her first books, which was, I think they said something like, she'll be a great writer once she starts writing about people, or something like that, right? And what they meant was, stop writing about Black folk,
right,
and start writing about Americans, right? And for me, it got to a point where I just said, stop thinking about the other people and start thinking about myself and those memories, histories, and things that I wanted to say in the work. And it was a really challenging moment for me at that point, because I lost clients. I remember getting fired from one of my first jobs because I wanted to talk about George Washington Carver in a more multi-dimensional way, and they wanted a statue. Right. And I found a PhD at Cal where they talked about his feminine side, and I thought it was great, so I made a root wall where students would come and place roots in the dirt, and every spring something would come up and we wouldn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. But that was like the first project. Never got built, but it always stayed with me, this idea that I could be present in the work, that there could be care in the work to sort of open yourself up and be vulnerable, and it could come at the expense of your pocket, mm-hmm. right? And that was a really challenging time. But even going forward today, you know, I think I have a little bit more courage today to do those things. And even today, not everyone wants to be part of that conversation. And I've even gotten fired, you know, even more for trying to do that work. So I'll leave it at that.
It's great, this point about being willing to get fired, right? What are you sort of able to risk in a way, in a practice? And obviously risk is associated with privilege, to be frank, in America, who has that kind of position and opportunity to do that. And so when we think and talk about our public spaces, how they're managed, policed, governed, and resourced, we have to navigate privilege anyway. So I love your kind of initial frame of, you know, the double consciousness, Toni Morrison, like what are all these structures that are privileging space and navigating the public. So it's
and it's easy not to deal with that stuff.
Right.
I mean, even for a Black person, it's really easy to like go in and just do some nice design and walk away and go home and feel good, you know, and not have to worry about losing jobs or getting critiqued in a certain way.
Firelei.
I knew you were going to do it. So I guess that it's amazing because everything floods in and then there's a traffic jam and you can't say the right thing. But speaking along the lines of what you were saying, that especially when you are used to or you have been brought up as with the ideas of yourself being from within the margins, there's nothing that can really understand the center more than someone who stands outside it, or outside the circle, or exists between spaces. So, like you were saying, the ease of just making something beautiful comes out of a deep understanding of what's expected, of what the form wants to be. So then to slowly transform that requires extreme love, first of all, and extreme risk, because you can see what's coming from outside, what are the things that could make it stronger or better, or what are the changes. And if you're not used to having that mindset, anything outside that inner structure is going to seem like either a threat or a marring of what's beautiful, because your understanding of beauty is specific. So when I make public works, I usually try to negotiate both, really bringing in, I think I like to call it like the honey before the bee sting, where you can have really subversive beauty. You can include all the different languages that speak in a nuanced way to, in a multivalent way to different communities, but also have specificity. So if you're just coming in without the knowledge of different symbolic languages, then it's just something gorgeous you can experience. Like in the subway in 163rd, that is a community that has gone through many, many ethnic transformations within a very short period of time. When I was commissioned to do the project, it was primarily Dominican, but I know that it had been Jewish. It was also transitioning to a very Asian community. And so how do I speak to all those and all the potential new changes that would come after that work would be there? One of the boons of doing something in the MTA, I consider it the best public art project or the freest art expression within the city, because these projects can potentially last for at least 100 years. So you're speaking to people far beyond your inner circle or what you're exposed to every day. So yeah, there's a lot of give and take. And some of the risk mitigation is from really acknowledging what is considered beautiful, absorbing that, and then trying to slowly push it forward.
Yeah, it's really great. And I love what you're introducing, which is this element of time, right? And something I was noting earlier, right? This conversation, this topic, talking about equity and justice and all of that, right? Been a different conversation if it were a few months after 9/11 or a few months after Superstorm Sandy, right? And that kind of framing is important to acknowledge that we're needing to kind of communicate across time, across kind of our different social challenges, the kind of the milieu that we're operating within. But Laurie, I'll pull you in now to see your frame.
I'm glad you mentioned 9/11 because when we're talking about public art, it's really, I never know exactly who I'm talking to. And often in doing works in theater, you can see who's there, and that's a big advantage because you can see, and I do a lot of editing that way. Just people in audience really think they're invisible, and they're, I light them so that I can see if a lot of people are like, I just really take that out of the show if it's boring, actually, because I think people are really great editors, and they're, Anyway, so mentioning 9/11 was a huge story, but a huge event that was one of the few times in our extremely fraught culture where we kind of came together, and emergencies like that, I think, tell you something about what people want, and tell you something a little bit about how death shows you those things. And when I think of some of these issues of freedom and what we're allowed to say and what we're not allowed to say, I think and what these conversations are about and arguments, it seems to me they're kind of poles, and one would be, as you mentioned, this continuum of death on one side and freedom on another, so that these arguments, for example, about abortion, about guns, are, for some people, guns are freedom, and others, guns are death. Right. For some, abortion is freedom, others, abortion is death. So we have many shifting opinions for everybody, that everyone has, about what freedom is. It's just a word that's tossed around in the wildest, craziest way. Right. And of course, I'm very confused about this topic at the moment. That's why I said yes to coming to here, because there's so many issues involved in this now that it's and trying to sort them out is really, really important. I also feel a generational pull too, to trying to, as we were talking backstage, about what it is to be a kid now, which is a very, very, very different thing than our own childhoods. It's a different, essentially different world with many, many, many more people. First of all, and many, many more stories and many more opinions and divisions, and also art that has become so politicized. So that I'm very afraid of shows that have themes. I always say no to that because you have to then kind of adjust your work to the curators. This is going to make the world a better place. Really? Better for who? You and your friends? Who? What are you talking about? What's right here? I mean, so it's. As a Buddhist, I have to say everyone's right, always. No one is ever wrong. So, and I mean that in the most basic way. You are never wrong. So I have to try to live up to that when I see a headline like in today's paper, when this woman is getting a lot of flack from her university for saying some extremely racist things. So is she right? Really? So anyway, hope I'm giving you a sense of how confused I am.
Well, the thing is, right? I think we're all collectively, confused, challenged, under stress and duress. Obviously, COVID is another kind of one of those events, right? That has forced us, I think, to engage and to question. And I like that you're bringing up this, this sort of freedom question, because public spaces, right, are one of our most important kind of connections and expression. The fact that there is public space is a form of expression of that. And Mark, I'll pull you in because you're mentioning this idea of difference, right, in our work, how we make spaces, how we think about and resource our spaces in a way. So curious kind of your frame or point of entry.
So it's interesting. It's wonderful to hear these comments from very different points of view. And I remember seeing Walter, the the evening before he had to go out to Princeton, we were talking about this earlier, when he had done this Woodrow Wilson monument, which was meant to question Woodrow Wilson. It was around Wilson's racism and about unnaming the building. And so I thought, and Walter said, well, I'm going to meet with students. And I said, well, that'll be great, right? I mean, you're meeting with students, and you're meeting with students of color. That should be great. Should be a breeze. And Walter said, no, they're all pissed off because they're saying this is blackwashing, and then this is, the university, once again, cooking up some strategy to not have to deal with stuff themselves and to allow the artist somehow to come in and write our understanding of things. And so it brings to mind this idea both of kind of beauty, but also who's deciding what's beautiful or what's good, right? And so we see so much public art, and I know, Justin, you've been involved over the past years in deciding, is it too abstract? Not abstract enough? Too figurative? Is this good history or bad history? And so there is a way in working with, in my past, having worked in granting support for mayors of American cities, there was a way in which mayors, government officials, the marketplace doesn't want to make ripples. Ripples is bad business. And so there's a will to make uniform visions, as Walter, you said, of happy people, when in fact we all find happiness in very, very different ways. So there is not one set form, just like there wasn't one set form of appropriate blackness at Princeton in the Woodrow Wilson context. And that kind of nuance is much harder to find in public art, in the public realm, because there's always a fear of offending someone. And I do often think, like Firelei, that beauty is a way in. Beauty, there's a kind of seductive quality. If people won't engage at all, then they won't ask themselves questions. And that's maybe the honey you're mentioning, is bringing people closer to ideas that they find difficult so that they'll begin to question their own received ideas about things.
Yeah, I think, this goes back to the point about language. I think semiotic symbols that both of Firelei and Walter were raising, and I think, how people read a space is something that we have to navigate because we all have different backgrounds, understandings, sort of conditioning that are crashing, I think, in public oftentimes. And we have seen this, here in New York, the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument, famously, the Beyond Sims, the work around the removal of the J. Marion Sims monument and what would replace it, right, came across these really strong differences of opinion that played out in public. But allowing for language, nuance, complexity, multiple readings is important. So I think maybe, Firelei or Walter, you mentioned like the Easter egg, right? Or the, the codes and the coding and kind of how do you make multiple layers of reading possible in public spaces and public art?
It's for me. I'm going to veer and go back to what you were talking about earlier because it's kind of sticking with me because I'm reading The Wake right now and working in Alabama, but this idea of freedom and death. I like how you talked about those two because we live a tragedy, right? We know what's going to happen, right? Right? You guys know what's going to happen. Right? You're going to die, right? Yeah. But this idea of working your way there, right? What is that freedom? And how do you talk about that freedom? Because I think that's where that real tension kind of lies. And, for me, it's finding that place for me to have a kind of a freedom of expression, but also work in a context where the people that I'm working with, I want that freedom as well. And so again, it's like a callus has to build, because not everybody's going to like your work or what you're doing. But I think in the public realm, you have to be willing to allow that freedom, right, to come in. And then there's a very interesting thing that can happen, right, which is a conversation. The one piece you see, Freed here, F-R-E-E-D, is in Arlington, Virginia, and I was interested in the word freedmen, freed women. And this is the first freedmen's village was in Arlington Cemetery, and people are part of that diaspora. And so I went down this rabbit hole, like started going to these meetings and talking about freed. What does it mean to be freed? And this one guy gets up, brother, had just come back from the war at the time, and he says, Mr. Hood, I went and fought for freedom. You know, I hate this project, but I respect you. And there was this moment where, you know, he was like, I hear what you're saying, but I don't agree, but I respect you. And more after that experience, you know, trying to sort of leave yourself open and allowing those voices to come in. And sometimes it even shifts the work, right? Where it's not trying to sort of appease them to a certain degree, but just hearing that other side, if you're open, it forces you to kind of see things and work in a different way. And again, it's messy, it's not as clear, but I do think for me that duality, and then on the other side, death, we don't like to talk about death. In a way, it's a kind of an abstract thing until it happens, right? And that's the other thing, a lot of our work recently has been trying to deal with this idea of the ground, and the ground being this residual, the mulch, right, for life to a certain degree. And there are a few projects we're working on that have that part of it. And it's been, again, kind of, for me, a revelation to kind of all of a sudden think about where I come from, which is the South, and how death was just so much part of that. And then going to the north, up north, and no one really dealt with the dying, other than when someone got shot or when someone died. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
There is, I guess from big to small, like the idea that we're actively living in an explosion. The universe is an active explosion. And we are these tiny little things that are happening to experience consciousness. And within that consciousness, we're trying actively to not experience love. We're actively trying to like squelch each other out. Like, no, we want to be part of the rest of the explosion. Let's end consciousness. So then how do you work within that space of eternal judgment? We're always judging each other and judging ourselves. Like, I guess the only way we can demarcate our being is to say, I am me and that is something else. Instead of like, every vibrating part of me is part of every vibrating part of everything else. So that's super woo-woo. Within that, what is ethic? Knowing that we are so much bigger than all the ideas that we have that are just making a tighter vessel for who we could be. How do you choose to make work that can help us get beyond that? So I always keep that in mind whenever I have a public project. There was one banner that shows here of, I guess it's like someone throwing a favela out into this open ocean. But it's built over a plan of an area in Philadelphia where MOVE happened.
Slide 11, you can pull that up.
Yeah.
So if you're from the area and you know that square geography, you would know what happened and how all the things that now are considered so palatable, upcycling, recycling, composting, were things that were considered an act of warfare, active warfare, to the point where this community was bombed. How do you then maybe send love back to them and say, hey, your ideas mattered, so much so that they are now part of all of what we actually value, what we're trying to aim for. We're trying to, and this was actually a sister mural that happened in Richmond. And something that you can't see, part of the Easter eggs, is that part of her body, I like to invoke different color and symbolic structures. We're so familiar with kind of like the Christian Virgin Mary blue, and it has a counterpart in Yemonja. There's that blue comes out of a Gallic tradition of, actual like warrior paint. And so for that to be incorporated into kind of the symbol of all-encompassing healing matriarchy is always fascinating to me. So just having it just flew by
just
quickly.
go back to that.
Having the nuance of something that can in one space mean war and another can mean healing, and that there are, like Laurie said, no right and wrong. There are just different ways of seeing. There's different ways of maybe, there's a story of blind men trying to describe an elephant, and one thinks it's a rope, one thinks it's a stone, one thinks it's like all these descriptions, all of the same thing. How are we speaking of the same thing in multiple languages, and how can we maybe get closer to speaking with each other and understanding that like there's many, many ways of doing things.
Yeah, I think it's so important, this framing that you're introducing of all of these multiple readings and understandings, because we have, we have dominant narratives in this country that are inscribed in our public spaces, the stories that we tell again and again and again, right? But what you're introducing here with the Easter egg, with the introducing new frames, new characters, new understandings is so important, because it's been missing for such a long time, right? For a place that socially, culturally has defined itself by its multiplicity, right? E pluribus unum, in theory, right? The idea that the layers are not there, right? They're not legible, they're not sort of seen, and I think your work has been this practice, right, of helping us see and find the new layers, the more complete people who we are and in our spaces. Another kind of thread of this conversation that has come up in many cases is that this work in public is often policed, for the lack of a better term, right? And that could be literally policed, it could be through regulation, it could be through public conversation of differences of opinion from a lot of different perspectives. So I'd like to hear a little bit from you all, this idea that the space has to get regulated and controlled and sort of connected to these power structures that exist. As an artist, right, and you're able to maybe navigate that possibly in different ways, right? When you're coming up against a difference of opinion or a regulation or a way of doing things, right? A kind of a mode that has to be shifted or adapted. Can you talk a little bit about how you've found yourself, in those conditions of moving against, let's say, power? And I'm going to lob this one to Laurie. Yes.
I want to talk about that in a sec. Well, actually, I'll just say one thing was when I was working on one of these pieces that you've seen flashing by, which is a piece working with a youngest detainee at Guantanamo. I did get, and it was a series of things that I've done with people in prison for maybe the last 25 years, sort of prison and time ideas. And I did get a visit from Homeland Security during
That's literally power.
And they said, we just want to let you know that you will never do this project in the United States of America. And I was like, okay, that's very clear. Now, this is a government guy. It's like you could always get around things, This is the wonderful thing about being an artist is you shift the story a little bit. And you can absolutely get around. I can go into that a little bit later if we want to, but I just wanted to respond to what you just said about love and care and art's relationship to those things, because I think it is all. It's very, very hard to live in late capitalist days in which we're all pitted against each other, and which it's really not a time of the greatest love. And so I really appreciate what you said about that. I think it's a very, I think that artists have no more responsibility to express love than people who work in the post office, people who do anything can make this culture better. We have some sharper tools, but what we also said about beauty and making this kind of honey around things, because sometimes I think that just beauty itself, it doesn't have to sugarcoat a more complicated idea. It's just beautiful. And as an artist, I most of my deepest experiences as a viewer of art is when I just don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's just like, what? No one's telling me that means something. I'm just like, what is that? And that's what I live for. I live for that, and then or also some sort of more self-contained thing, like a poem that is a mechanism for understanding the poem. You know, that you just kind of go, oh, look at this thing. Oh, what is this? This is what artists do. You know, we all should be kind to each other. That's absolutely true. But I don't think we have a bigger responsibility to do that than any citizen in the United States. You know.
Quick counter to that, I completely agree. I just feel like that poetry should be given to the postman in a way that, like, I don't think is as generous today. Like, there isn't, especially in contemporary U.S., the space for someone to have the leisure time for expressing personal ideas around beauty, other than like Netflix and chill or etc.
It's an interesting point. You know, we're about access to the luxury of space to think, or what the Academy offers is time and space to think and work. It is, when I explain this to people, it seems like a remarkably rarefied idea. Like, wow, great, enjoy yourselves. Send us a
for you.
postcard.
Right.
But we're working on a project now on the work of a writer and a designer, June Jordan. And I've been reading her work, her poetry, which is really direct and activist. And she was the first black woman in any discipline at the Academy in 1970, and the first woman in design, what was then called environmental design, which was a much more kind of porous concept than architecture alone. But she worked with Buckminster Fuller, and she wanted to re-envision Harlem
It's wonderful.
after the
project.
64 riots, right? And so it both looks somewhat like towers in the park, but it's not. You know, it's incredibly porous, and it's meant to create an armature for other kinds of activities to happen. So it's very, very open. She also makes a comment, and this is for Susan, that she did all of her research in the evenings at the Donnell Library across from MoMA. And this goes back to your point, with a son at home. After she had made dinner for her husband and her son, she would put on her coat, go to the Donnell Library, and study. And that's how she learned about architecture and design, because she was trained as a writer. She was at Barnard. And that's when she discovered Buckminster Fuller, who she thought was innovative and open and porous and she just wrote to him and said, I want to do this. I want to do this project for Harlem, and I want to do it with you. So it's amazing, and amazing that she was supported in 1970 at the Academy to do this without a degree in design. She was able to get this fellowship, and it does suggest that if people are given the time and space, it does yield remarkable things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the beautiful thing is we're in a library,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, I was reading the paper. I guess you guys are cutting your libraries. You guys have a budget issues, right? And then the feedback was the libraries do so much. But, you know, I can remember as a kid, the library was the one place that every community had. It was just a thing you did. After school, you went to the library. And that's where I learned about architecture. I mean, you learn stuff there. Yeah. But today, in communities, particularly where I live, there is no library. Right? That institution doesn't work. It's like one of them. It's like one thing. Versus these smaller, like you're saying, these places where you want people to have care. I mean, this is something, and by giving communities that, it's understood that it's yours, you know, and that ability to have a space like that. And it was great coming up this elevator. Right? I mean, it took me a long time.
But we took the local. Yeah.
It was nice,
I know.
though, you know, it was sort of like, not like my hotel.
Yeah. Well, I do want to transition to, we have some great audience questions that I want to bring into the conversation here. So this one says, how has your work been impacted by the distillation of our experience and by the distraction of our devices, our phones? And I think this threads into one of the kind of backstage conversations we're also having with the generational differences that's connected to all of these devices. So they're asking, is the collective experience being flattened by some of these devices, and how do you see that relative to this public space conversation? Laurie?
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's backstage.
I know people at the record company I work with, Nonsuch Records, it's really very different to make records now than it was. Because unless it's on TikTok, it doesn't exist. So unless it works like that, so you can imagine what that does to everything. And so obviously attention spans and all of that are really interesting. I mean, I think it's probably possible to work with super short attention spans. That could be really, very interesting. I don't know how to do it, but I think it certainly can be done, because we have a different sense of time now. It's like it's really, really rushing by. There must be a way to address that in a really interesting way. I don't know what that is. But for now, it's a marketing thing. It's TikTok is the way that things are bought, and they're bought really fast, and an impulse sort of thing. So we're all customers.
I mean, there's a layer of this too, right, which is the algorithm, right? Yep. And so we were talking earlier about kind of power, control, language, codes, right? The students that they listen to an hour-long lecture, and there's the one word that gets activated. And so there's a lot of complexity in this that I think are being navigated here. In New York, some might have heard about this when we had the Monuments Commission. They were sort of prompts, okay, how we solicit and gather public input, right? So you have a website, you have a portal, and people go and they put their comments. But of course, then that can be activated in a different way, right? You can have intentional overrepresentation of certain voices or opinions by virtue of that platform, right? So if the technology isn't designed to acknowledge the change in attention span, the degree of engagement, the biases that come with different engagement, right? Who has the internet plan, all these things are really, really big challenges that I think we're all trying to still navigate. We're lost, I think, at the moment, thinking about some of these conversations.
I mean, it also, maybe suggests that we're losing the mundane in the public realm, right? If I hear another client goes, "Where's the Instagram moment?"
Wow.
Right? Where design becomes this kind of, you got to give me a thing so people can come and then do the thing. And they don't care about anything else. And so the mundane, so
Scary.
if you're making something that, when I say mundane, where it's kind of like, everything is, in this place.
Yeah, common.
You got can you give me more, And so I do think it's changing our ability to be in a kind of a mundane space where everything has to be overly theatrical, or that backdrop has to be really, really, really powerful. And, to a certain degree, it almost creates a world where we're not in the space, right? We're like curating these images somewhere, and then we go back and we become part of that space where we share. And, it's one of those things where it's a really hard thing, because, I get it. I do get it. And of course, I want my stuff to be photographed really well. But it gets you out of kind of understanding, what might someone even remember from a space? Or even from a museum. I was in a museum in London watching the procession, was in this wonderful
The
thing.
Hugh Lock.
And everyone was in there just taking pictures.
Yeah.
Right angle.
And I just wanted to just walk. I just wanted to be in the space. And that's why I had to wait almost to closing time.
Oh, no. You just walk right through their shots. You're like,
Just bomb them all.
yeah, add nuance to it. I keep thinking of the same thing of how part of the response to tech is that we're collectively in a dissociative state. And part of that is being furthered from your body, furthered from like actually remembering. If you're dissociated, you think of, you might not even have the memory to begin with. They'll just have to go to the photo. And the only way to really clinically calm that down is to make you feel comfortable, to make you feel safe enough to basically be like, oh, wait, I can actually engage in this. I don't need to save it. I don't need to hoard this information for later. I can just be pleasurably in the moment. And that is something that is very, by design. It's engineered so that you're being parsed out and you have the trigger word, and then like you just respond to the thing because you don't have the time. So that's what we can do as artists. We can create those spaces for, as part, like Hugh Locke, one of the architectural pieces I have in the slideshow, back to your comment about death and our relationship to dying, how in the US it just seems like, because we are a youth culture, there is this thing of transience. There's not this connection of like, actually everyone who came before you is an ancestor. They're informing you. This is a resource you can have. Toni Morgan talks about that. Like, we choose to be here. We can speak forward in time. We'll be someone else's ancestor. How do you then take that and like revel in that? Make space for it and be like, I'm informed by this. I can make room for this.
Yeah, I love the tie to the ancestors and kind of the deep time and deep histories that can exist in place. In defense of technology, there's a wonderful project called Kinfolk. It's a group of activists called Movers and Shakers that developed an augmented reality set of monuments, sort of digital installations that everybody can get from their devices if they have a device, but it's connected to an archive, right? So there's the art, the expression, the kind of the thing that you interface and experience, but you can get the primary source research, right? The speeches that were made, or the newspaper articles about the young lords and their kind of activism that are connected to the monument, and the technology is what allows that space. So there is some positives to technology, I'll say. Kind of final question as we're closing out, and I think it's an appropriate one. So how do you combine aesthetic beauty with socially conscientious messages in your work as public artists?
Another one.
Give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses.
Right. What's the idea of beauty, I think, was kind of a thread that we're picking up on, and what's the power of working with beauty in this work?
The power of working with beauty?
Yeah, kind of the aesthetic value.
Well, I think that's a question that answers itself, because beauty is overpowering, and it's one of the things, fortunately, that's kind of hard to put into words, and it's one of the reasons why we make things, why we make colors and notes and shapes and spaces, is because you can't put those into words that well. Some people do try, but it's you kind of have to be there. Otherwise, if we just had some ideas, it would be much simpler to just type them out and email them to everybody, and you've got the idea. You wouldn't have to bother to make all these colors and do all this other thing. So I what I'm trying to say is, art is a different category. Even as much as it absorbs so many things about who we are and what we are trying to do here and who we love and what we think, it really has and this is one of the reasons that I think it would be so amazing to get more art classes back in schools, because people think art is a TED Talk. Yeah. What is this giving to me? What message do you have? That's not a message. It's just just open your eyes and decide for yourself. Don't wait for us to tell you what it means. So I think and so art classes would be great, I think, no?
I agree.
Yeah.
Even just a moment for kids to get their hands dirty.
Yeah.
Like right now, there's, you can do a lot of iPad drawing, and I have nieces who, by the time they were 6 months old, they could unlock the phone, open specific apps.
Yep.
They were really versed. So by the time they were 1, they had very particular aesthetic choices. But to get their hands dirty, it was like overload. So then when they actually got to do it and felt comfortable in it, the things they could make were just amazing. But yeah, the tech itself, back to that. One quick thing is as language beings, we will find the most efficient way of doing things. So the TikTok will feel efficient, but the only thing is that being tech dependent, tech is always changing by nature. Talkies, then color movies, and American Gods was a great show. Shout out. Just the way they explained it was just so great.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Well, that's our time. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
so
much.
much.
This
so
was
much.
a wonderful, wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
House lights.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for
Have a
coming,
nice
everyone.
evening, everybody.
Yes. Yeah.